All right, we're speaking with Dale Arnold, legendary New England sportscaster. You know him from Nesson doing the Bruins games. For how long did you do the Bruins games, Dale? Was it like 600 years, 700 years?
Even longer than we've been friends when you worked for the Rock and Roll Animals down the hall, Hsu.
Yes.
Even longer than that.
That's right, yeah, forever. So you have a new book out. It's called Tough Guys. It is, I believe, an important document because the tough guys in the NHL, they are disappearing. A lot of the fighting in hockey has gone out over the years, and you in your book talk to some of the greatest, the legendary tough guys from way back, not too way back, but then some more fairly current guys. And you start with Terry O'Reilly, the pride of the Bruins. And let me ask you, why did you start with Taz?
I couldn't picture writing this book without having him in it. And he was the very first person I contacted and explained the book and said, hey, will you be a part of it? He said, absolutely. He said, give me a call. We'll talk. We'll do this. And I tell the story in the book, not to give too much of the book away, but it starts with my phone rings and it's Taz. And he says, Dale, I'm sorry I'm late calling you. He said, I was out skating. Now, he's 71 now. At the time, he was 70 when we spoke. He's had both knees done. He's had hips done and this and that. And I couldn't help but ask the simple question, why?
Yeah.
And he said, he paused for a minute and he said, well, I wanted to see if I still liked it. And I said, did you? And he laughed and he said, maybe you better ask me tomorrow.
Right.
And that's, you can't talk to him without getting a smile on your face. I've known him for 30 some odd years now, one of my absolute favorite people. But he's the guy, when I think of tough guys, Hsu, I think of guys who on the ice would scare the ever-loving crap out of you. And off the ice, as gentle and kind and nice a person as you've ever met in your life. He's the first guy I think of when I think of that type of person. I talk to other guys who are like that as well, but I had to start with Taz.
And then you also start off with, in your introduction, you say that these are the guys who, the enforcers, they are mostly very sweet guys off the ice. They're very generous. And I forget who said it. It may have been Paul Stewart or Archie Henderson. They said they didn't choose this position. These guys don't choose this position. They do it because they had that special set of skills, as they keep calling it in your book, and they wanted to stick around in the NHL. And that was the only way they could do it at the time, was proving that they could protect their teammates. It's interesting how they're like the nicest guys, and they were kind of forced into a position.
I've had the pleasure and the honor of doing play-by-play for all 5 pro teams in Boston. So I've dealt with all of the athletes, the professional athletes, over the course of my career. And you know this, Hsu, you've been around as well. Easily, by far, hockey players are the easiest, nicest professional athletes to deal with. Nobody will argue that. Well, within that group of hockey players, there's this subset, and it's what I call the tough guys. And they're a group within the group, and they might even be nicer than the normal hockey player and more down to earth. And I think a lot of it is they all started out wanting to be quote-unquote hockey players, realized in many of their cases that they probably didn't have the skills to be able to do that. Now, Terry O'Reilly was a guy who made himself a hockey player, by the way. He was not just a fighter. He was a hockey player. But some of these guys, as you correctly point out, the only way they could make a living was to do that. And I can't think of a harder thing to do. You're in bed at night, the night before a game, you're gutting and not thinking about, well, tomorrow night I'm going to fight this guy and that guy and maybe that guy. Or you're sitting in your stall before a game and you're looking at the roster and you're thinking, well, at some point tonight, I'm going to get in a bare knuckles brawl with this guy and this guy. And, oh, by the way, that guy is 6'7" and outweighs me by 40 pounds. And I'm going to try to beat the ever-loving crap out of him. And he's going to try to beat the ever-loving crap out of me. I can't even envision how you go to work every day thinking that way and thinking how you make a living that way. But these guys all did it.
And knowing you're probably going to do something like get your nose broken or get a cheek broken or, get stitched up over and over again. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, stitched up is the best case scenario, right? I mean,
right, yeah.
Stitched up, nobody thinks about that. Okay, stitch me up, I'll go back out. As you said, there are a lot worse things going on, some of which we didn't realize at the time. And over the course of working on this project, I worked on it for about a year and a half, I came to change some of my thoughts and feelings about fighting and the toll it takes on these guys. Not the broken bones, as you say, the broken noses, the cheekbones, the knuckles. We know so much more now about head trauma and concussion and CTE than we ever knew before. And I got to admit, it's made me think twice about it now.
You bring that up in the book, too. And again, not to give away too much, but you make it clear, like, you're not trying to glorify anything because of what you were just talking about. But I think it was, who was it? Was it Dave Brown or maybe Archie Henderson in your book said, the game doesn't have as much toughness as it should anymore. There should be a toughness to this game.
That was Dave Brown.
Yeah.
And of all of the people I spoke to in the book, when you talk to the other tough guys in the book about other guys who were in the book, they almost all point at him as maybe being the toughest. Now, many of them didn't play against Terry O'Reilly, so, I've got to put a proviso in there. But Dave Brown was as tough as anybody who I write about in this book, and he said he understands why there's not as much fighting as there used to be. He understands the position that the National Hockey League is in. But there's a toughness lacking that doesn't necessarily mean fighting. There's a toughness factor that has been negated somewhat, and he doesn't think that's for the better.
Yeah, and you bring some of that up, or I think it was John Shannon, actually, one of the chapters in the book, who's not – now, John Shannon never played. Am I correct? He was just a broadcaster, right?
I wanted somebody who could tell me how did tough guys, how did bench-clearing brawls, how were they covered? And John, for years and years and years, a legendary broadcaster in Canada, Hockey Night in Canada, and all of the different broadcast entities. And he told me, he said, we had a code word. When a bench-clearing brawl broke out, they would say a code word, whatever it was, and you had an assignment. Okay, I hear that code word. I'm shooting this bench. That guy over there shooting that bench. I'm finding this guy. This guy's finding that guy. They had a battle plan going into games, knowing that there was a pretty good chance they were going to see this stuff happen.
I find that fascinating. In all your years of broadcasting, did you ever work for somebody, or did you yourself ever have a battle plan or brawl mode, as John would call it, something that where you were ready to go once things broke out?
I think it almost happened by osmosis. I started my career in 1979 with the Maine Mariners in the American Hockey League. Now, they were the top minor league affiliate of the Philadelphia Flyers. And you know what the Flyers were like back in the late 70s, early 80s. They were street bullies for a reason. And the Mariners were the Philadelphia Flyers at an American Hockey League level. They were filled with those sorts of guys. And bench-clearing brawls back in those days were at least a weekly, if not 2 or 3 times a week occurrence. You expected it. You knew it was going to happen. And so you went into a game knowing, well, there's a real good chance that, Archie Henderson is going to grab Jeff Brubaker, and they're going to go, and everybody's going to come off the benches. So you went into it knowing that you were probably going to see it. Now, I will tell you this. Long, long ago, I was happy to see bench-clearing brawls eliminated. Those were the only times where I thought guys could get seriously hurt. You couldn't protect yourself. There were too many guys, too many things going on at once, too few officials who could help, split things up and get things calmed down. I was glad when they got rid of bench-clearing brawls. They haven't completely gotten rid of fighting yet, although they're working towards it, at least in some of the junior leagues in Canada.
Now, Sean Thornton said, with all you were talking about the craziness and the chaos, and I think it was not Sean Thornton, who called it keeping order in the disorder, and that was like kind of what the enforcers did.
Yeah, and it might have been Milbury who told me that, and I'm sorry, I can't remember exactly either. But you had to, and by the way, all of these guys who were playing when there were bench-clearing brawls all said it was the only time where they were a little afraid. And they don't use that word, lightly, because, you just didn't know. You weren't sure. And, you could get hit from behind and have no idea where it was coming from. If they were going to square off with somebody, even if the guy was 6 inches taller and 40 pounds heavier, okay, I know what I'm doing here. We've got some rules involved here. I'm ready. We're willing combatants. We'll handle this like men. When the bench-clearing brawls happened, all those rules went out the window. And Archie Henderson was a guy, he tells the story in the book, and we take it even further. He was in a bench-clearing brawl in the International Hockey League, and Willie Trognitz took a 2-handed baseball swing across Archie Henderson's face and got suspended for life in the International Hockey League. And, Archie's laying in the training room as they're trying to get the game over with and get people out of the building. He doesn't even know what's going on out there at that point. And then, careers go on, and a few years later, he's getting assigned to Fort Worth and in the Central Hockey League, and he's talking to the general manager, and he said, well, I want number 19. And the general manager on the phone says, well, we gave that number away. And he says, I've been number 19 my whole life. That's the number I want. Take it away from the other guy, and I want to wear it. And the general manager rather sheepishly said, we gave it to Willie Trognitz.
Oh, yeah.
And that was the first time Archie Henderson knew, holy crap, that guy who broke his stick across my face is now my teammate. And in fact, ended up being his line mate. You think about how that messes with your mind.
Yeah. Yeah, because there's Sean Thornton mentions a code, and the number one code is you to give away a little bit of it. You always stick up for your teammates. That's the enforcer's job. And so he had to stick up for this guy who's hit him with a stick across the face. That was the code. But again, a lot of people don't know that there was a code. That these guys weren't just out there willy-nilly fighting. There were actual rules, and they respected each other for that.
Yeah, they're not written down anywhere. And if I asked each of these guys what their version of the code was, they might have different words, but the general meaning was the same for all of them. Rule number one, and you're right, top of the list. You always, always, always defend a teammate. And paraphrasing what they would say is, you never jump on somebody who's smaller than you,
right?
Unless he's done something to deserve it. You never cheap shot at somebody. If you get a guy at a disadvantage, Sean would always say, if I had a guy with his shirt over his sweater, I'm not going to pound on him, because the next time we fight, he may have my sweater over my head, and I don't want him pounding on me. Then, there are actual rules, and people don't understand. They think it's like professional wrestling, that these two guys can go out there and pound on each other. And I mean, bare knuckles, fist fighting, and they can see each other in the hallway after the game and shake hands and laugh about it, and they know it's part of the game. They know it's part of what they do for a living, and for the most part, they respect the other people who make a living that way too. There are exceptions. We talk about some of those in the book as well. There are some guys who I find the tough guys have zero respect for.
Were there any people that didn't make the book because they told you they didn't want to talk about it, or they just told you to get lost, or was there anyone who said, I don't want to talk about it, Dale?
No, I will honestly tell you, nobody declined. There were other guys that I'd like to have included in the book, and I just couldn't find ways to get in touch with them. I wanted to talk to Tiger Williams, who's got more penalty minutes than anybody in the history of the game. I think he would have been a valid guy to put in this book. Unfortunately and sadly, there are other unbelievable tough guys in the history of the National Hockey League who aren't with us anymore, and some of them because of the toll this took on them. Guys like Bob Probert and Derek Bugard, guys who I would love to have been able to talk to. I can honestly tell you, Hsu, every single guy that I could talk to, that I could say, hey, here's what I've got in mind, this is what I'm working on, will you be a part of it? Every single one of them said yes. Not a single guy declined. Now, in many of these cases, I knew these guys. A lot of these guys I knew from my minor league days, from my National Hockey League days. There was one difference in that I intentionally went out of my way. I said, I've got to get off my comfort level here, and I've got to talk to somebody I don't know and I don't like. And I found a way to make connections with Matthew Barnaby. And we talked, and I told him what I was going to do, and he said, absolutely. And it was ironic because we were talking in the middle of the winter last winter, and storms, and he lives up near Buffalo, and I live in Maine, and we got disconnected a couple of times, and he was patient, and he was giving, and we talked. And as I said in the book, damn it, I ended up liking the guy. I didn't want to. I didn't like him as a player. I mean, I thought he was a jerk as a player. And probably all these guys that I know were considered jerks by opposing fans anyway. I ended up liking him, and he was like all the other tough guys that I talked to. You enjoy. They're the types of guys, Hsu, you would love to go have a beer and just talk sports with.
Absolutely. We've worked together, not together, but we worked in the same building, Dale, and I'd run into play. I worked with an enforcer, Lyndon Byers.
You did.
From the Bruins.
And the only reason I didn't include him was because he'd been going through some things physically, and I didn't want to bother him at the time.
Right. But it's so true. These guys on the ice people would call them animals, and it was almost animal-like behavior. But off the ice, you just couldn't find sweeter guys, and especially in my personal, with like LB and like Jay Miller, who's in your book. I remember going down to his place down there in Falmouth, the Parrot, and talking to him.
Yep.
I mean, just one of the nicest guys. He would talk to everybody. They're the first ones to tell the best stories ever. And that's another thing I like about the book, Dale. It's kind of like from the interviews I've heard you do, you let them tell the story. And I think it's just, that's what makes it such a riveting read to me.
Let's be honest, Hsu. Nobody's buying a book because my name's on the front cover. They're buying a book because they want to hear from PJ Stock or Jay Miller or Dave Brown or Chris Nyland. They want to hear their stories. And it was the same way when I was hosting Bruins hockey, and I always used to joke about this. When I'd be on a set with Barry Peterson and Billy Jaffe, my goal was to say as few words as I could possibly say to get them to where they needed to be. Because you want to hear from them. You want to hear what they have to say. And I felt the same way when I wrote this book. I tried to say as few words as I could say and just shut the hell up and let them talk and get out of the way and let them go. And that's what I ended up with.
Well, the stories are awesome. It's really one of those books, Dale. Well, I haven't felt like this about a book in a while, where I get out of work, I do all my responsibilities, and I'm rushing through the day so I can get back to reading the book because the stories are so great, and it's amazing. The stories, just the stories from the Western Canada Hockey League.
Oh, the Western Hockey League, where it was the wild, wild west.
Yeah,
and, that's mainly in Archie's chapter. I mean, some of the stories of what was going on out there, they literally had teams and players quit.
Yeah.
I don't want to do this anymore. This isn't worth it. I don't want to play against these guys anymore.
Man. Well, it's a great book. The Tough Guys by Dale Arnold. Dale, I appreciate your time. Again, it's an awesome book, and I'm glad it's a great document because, a lot of that kind of hockey is almost all gone. It sprouts up little bits here and there, but the days of the established enforcer are really kind of way behind us now, unfortunately.
I found it interesting since Chris and I spoke for this book, Chris Nyland. I see where a couple of weeks ago he said he was going to donate his brain for scientific study because he wonders. And in the book, I said, if you could take a test for CTE today and know that you had it or didn't, would you take it? Because the only way you can test for CTE is after someone's dead. Mm. And he hesitated for a minute, and he said, no, I wouldn't do it because you can't fix it, you can't treat it, and I don't want to live my life knowing that was what was going to happen. Yeah. He said, I wouldn't take the test. But now he wants people to be able to study what happened to him and go forward with it.
Well, Dale, thank you so much. I'm actually, I'm sure there are some stories that were either edited for length or maybe that you just couldn't put in the book. Maybe we can get together later. You could tell me some of those.
Sure, that'd be my pleasure, man. Anytime. It's great to talk to you again.